Hello to everyone. Good day or good morning, whatever the case might be. My name is Simbai Yafele from the University of Johannesburg. This presentation reports on a study investigating how translanguaging pedagogy can be adapted for online academic literacy instruction amongst multilingual first-year students. Today, I discuss the problem, the intervention, the findings, and the implications for online learning. As a way of introduction, the investigational study offers a translanguaging academics literacy pedagogy conducted entirely online and specifically targeting African multilingual university students. It entwines academic reading for writing, a translanguaging pedagogy, and online learning in a virtual academic literacy class. The students' languages, their cultures, their socio-cultural identities are valued and aligned to academic literacy development and online learning for academic success. Um, these slides I want to just talk about, in this particular slide, I want to talk about, the academic literacy challenges that actually led to this particular study being undertaken. And as a way of explanation, many first year students in South African universities struggle to maintain academic literacy standards which are acceptable in higher education. Academic literacy, as we all know, is critical for the acculturation into academic discourses and into communities of practice, as conceptualized by James G. in 2015. So the problems, the challenges that forced this study to happen were simply that reading and writing difficulties persist. Engagement with sources, reading sources remain problematic, and therefore so reading research sources is a big problem. There's plagiarism, weak integration of research ideas and concepts which occurs, and generally, first year students, particularly African multilingual students, are affected by this. And so far, the current literacy pedagogies have not really, solved this problem, which is an indication that the current literacy pedagogies are actually problematic. According to Road and Land 2017, they point out the problems in reading and comprehension in meaning making. Similarly, Fleisch and Motilal in 2020 argue that the prevailing literacy pedagogies have not adequately addressed literacy challenges in South Africa. And therefore, this logically suggests that there is a need for alternative approaches. And so this slide talks to the translanguaging, approaches that are viable, and it presents translanguaging as a viable alternative, mainly because monolingual epistemologies in institutions actually promote a culture of silence, and silence is not conducive for learning. However, in translanguaging, students' languages become a resource, not a problematic deficiency. Hence, the current scholastic push for embracing translanguaging approaches, because translanguaging aligns with indigenous African philosophies such as Ubuntu, Umuntu, and Utu, because knowledge making in these African philosophies is collaborative rather than individualistic. And so, what is translanguaging? According to this study, okay, in this slide here, that diagram, that picture, or that visual, sort of, captures what translanguaging is all about, or how it is taken in this particular study. Okay, according to this study, translanguaging is a cognitive process which involves two or more languages which link into each other for meaning making. Translanguaging, therefore, is language fluidity engaged in meaning making using students' linguistic cultural repertoires. For example, students may receive information in the language of learning and teaching, LOLT, or the English of the text, and make meaning in their languages through discussion while writing in LOLT, according to Lewis et al. 2012. So what we have in translanguaging is crisscrossing between all languages, which are internal to the students, to complete sense making in the text, which is part of the text content and engagement. And so we've got flexible use of language, dynamic meaning making, in which students are drawing on their full linguistic repertoire to support academic engagement. And so this slide talks to the research gap, which lies in that translanguaging research is growing, and the evidence supports face-to-face contexts in which this translanguaging pedagogy is used. But online application remains under-researched. And so this was the gap, and we wanted to ask, can translanguaging work online? That was, the question. And so the research question is, can translanguage pedagogy work effectively in an online academic literacy environment? Can translanguaging literacy pedagogy, which really relies on talk and discussion, work effectively online? If so, how? So the study deliberately created translanguaging space adapted to online modalities of pedagogy, according to Zhu et al. 2020. The methodology, it is a mixed method case study, which used an experimental and a control group. The sample is all first year academic literacy students, and the qualitative methods included interviews and observation, and the quantitative methods included, pre-post testing. And here, the experimental and control groups were tested before and after the intervention, and the test scores were compared using descriptive statistical analysis. And so it was the study had an interventionist design in which we had the control group. And this control group used English as the medium of learning, as is typical in monolingual, monocultural university classes. The use of English, the use of languages, other than the target language English, is severely limited or non-existent. With the experimental group, however, there was flexible use of English and home languages in all their varieties, and the principle of language alternation was adapted as part of TransCollab, according to Mbirimi, Vungwe, and Makab. But all this was happening on Blackboard, on forums, on blogs, on Blackboard, on Collaborate Ultra, and on Microsoft Teams, where the students made their presentations on the readings that they had done, and they, chatted in the chat boxes and discussed these readings so that no one was left behind. So some of the translanguaging activities that were used are, there on this particular screen. The students brainstormed and discussed text content collaboratively online in any language they knew, but reported in English. They read the research text in English and retold the content in their home languages. They summarized the ideas in English and their languages. And so text preview, viewing, and reviewing was all done translingually, borrowing from the frameworks of Stein and Garcia and Makalela and and also Yafele. And so it is from all these frameworks that the study develops the translanguaging pedagogy model that was employed in this particular study. Um, and this slide just shows online translanguaging in practice. And this is coming from Microsoft Teams, wherein the students, engaged in collaborative dialogue. There were multiple languages, small group Teams chats, translingual chat online. They shared meaning making, evaluated, reviewed the research reading, and they transversed and moved in between isiXhosa, isiZulu, Setswana, Siswati, and English. And this was done simultaneously. And because these students, these have got multilingualism as a cultural competence, they could take each other, whichever language got used. This slide just showed that the students were given translanguaging space, and this is just coming from a student's presentation in which they'd made annotations on a text, and they could actually present their annotations and their analysis, their translingual analysis online to everyone. And this is just a screenshot from one of those presentations. And so they were given translanguaging space according to Way 27 online. They took notes, made annotations in the text in their own languages, and presented the text analysis and understandings on Teams translingually. And they made all those annotations on their PDFs and highlighted, using the comments tool. From the interviews data, we've got these students' perspectives in which one student says, we read the articles independently and virtually, reported back with paraphrased information in our own languages and in English. We were helping one another with text ideas in the essay. It was so engaging because everyone contributed and it all happened online. So what we see is that the research participants evaluated translanguaging online, literacy pedagogy very positively. And from the observations in the team's recording, it shows that they had fun and became confident. The student actually loved the translanguaging online literacy approach. And so this slide shows the quantitative results, the test results portrayed graphically. The control group, there was a slight decline in marks from the pre-treatment to the post-intervention test. The experimental group, however, there was a definite increase in scores from pre to post-test intervention tests. And so the translanguaging experimental group outperformed the control group in the post-intervention tests. And so to conclude, we can say translanguaging works online. Online platforms support multilingual learning, and academic literacy outcomes actually improved as a result of translanguaging pedagogy done online. And so, because of these conclusions, the only recommendation one can make is that integrating multilingual pedagogies into digital learning environment, is the way to go. We need to integrate multilingual pedagogies into digital learning environments. With that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I thank you very much for listening in. Thank you so much. Bye.